So I've been meaning to make this video for a while now. I have something that I have in the works that's going to be an addendum to this, but why not? I'll do this part first, I think. So there has been Alexandra uh, or or something Cortez. I can't remember her middle name for the life of me. But she's been advocating for democratic socialism. She's a part of the Democratic Socialist Party. She's now the running mate, and everybody praising in the Democratic Party. She is the savior of all holy and all that is good and righteous within the Democrats, to which I'm still a member of. But amazingly to me is that she advocates for things that are not socialist, which is funny. And it doesn't seem that her or Bernie Sanders or anybody else seems to understand what the fuck they're talking about when they talk about democratic socialism. So I'm going to break it down a little bit. I'm going to break it down by word, by choices, and by what ends up being the result. But first, let me tell you what doesn't make a good argument in this. The first off is pointing to countries where their socialism is great and socialism is horrible. Venezuela, a complete fucking shithole for now until socialism goes away, and it's because everything is owned by the state. They point to Sweden and Denmark, and there's still private industry there. They're capitalist. However, they have pretty good and effective social programs. And rightly so, but they also take half of everyone's income. Sure, some people maybe pay 35% or something less, but the median income, the middle tax bracket, would be half, close to 50%. Some other places are slightly bigger than that, but it's pretty much what you think it is. And I'll get to why that's important in a second. But let's break down what socialism is. But essentially, socialism is the ownership or means of production as a gateway to communism. Socialism is a means to the end. It means that it wants the means of productions and of goods and trade and basically all economics to be run and owned by the community at large, which means it's governmental control. They want the government to run things until the community can take over. So what's supposed to happen, and this is a ridiculous idea, is government takes over all means of production, so it's kind of centralized and it's no longer privatized, meaning the destruction of capitalism is gone. It's all community organized, it's all community organized or orchestrated. There is no private property. It's all public property now. Everybody lives together in harmony and bliss, and it's really just a massive utopia. And then communism steps in and gives all the power and all the regulations and delegations and everything right back to the people. There is no governing body except for the collective of the community. So that's where democracy steps in, and it's by popular vote that things happen, and only by popular vote. Hence why they want democratic socialism, where it's still state-run and it's under state control, but then it's by popular vote. So, two things wrong with that. First, it will never happen in the United States. Why? Because we are a representative republic. We are not a democracy. Democracy is mob rule. Democracy is majority rule. Democracy means that Hillary Clinton would have won because the majority voted for her. And the majority being California, New York, New Hampshire, so on and so forth. The most populous states would have voted her in, and the rest of us would be pretty much silenced or voted out because our votes would not matter, would not count. It's by popular vote. In a representative republic, the minority gets the power. So those that live in rural areas, those farmers, the roughneck workers, those type of people have more influence and say than Hollywood, than New York, or any other place that's massively metropolized and just overpopulated. They do not get a say. Well, okay, they do, but only if they can convince the minority that they are right, that they are correct, and this is the way it goes. So, this is what democratic socialism is. Democratic socialism would be mob rule where the means of production is owned by the state. That means everybody's job would be state jobs. Everybody's job would be federal jobs. There would be no private property. There would be no private ownership or private business. Google would be a state-run company. Facebook would be state-run. YouTube would be state-run. Every oil company that's in the United States, state-owned and state-run. If their headquarters is here, it's now the state's. It's no one else's. That also means all trade, inside and out, would be state-run. There would be no trade with China. There would be no trade with UK or whatnot unless it went through the state. The best the state can do right now is put tariffs and taxes on anything that comes in and out of the country. But the amount, the cost, and all that other stuff is owned by private business, meaning they really don't get a say in the matter. They can try to influence a little bit, but that's about it. So that's what social democracy, or democratic socialism, is. They want the means of production and the end of capitalism, the end of private ownership. Gone. Nothing is owned by them. So here's where the bad arguments are. People will point to Venezuela and say, look at that shithole. That place is horrible now thanks to socialism. They'll remind us that Hitler was a socialist. If you want to listen to his speeches, you go right ahead. I have, myself. He was a frickin' socialist. He wanted universal income. He wanted free education and free healthcare for all righteous and noble Germans. Those that were a part of the Nazi Party. That he wanted all that. He was definitely a socialist. If you listen to his speeches, you read his book, you know this is true. Those that don't bother reading the shit that they hate fail to understand it. It really just comes down to it. So they will then point to places like Sweden and Denmark. Sweden and Denmark do not own private industries. Private industry still exists. That's where the majority of the trade from. And they just tax 50% or more, or less, depending on how much you make. The middle tax bracket, the ones that are in the center, they pay half. They pay 50%. That's their taxes. They praise these places. So one side praises these places and see, look how socialism has benefited these places. They're not true socialism, but they're really damn close and they're just wonderful. Now, if they just own that private industry, they'd be set and on their way to the socialist utopia. And then the other side will say, well, look at Venezuela, Nicaragua, and other places that are socialist utopias, and look how well they're doing while beating a cow in the street so they can eat. Yeah, so both of those arguments are pretty much trying to argue by anecdotal evidence. You'll have one side say, well, real socialism has never been tried, and the other side say, yeah, because it's always a total fuck-up and a failure, and every time they've tried it, it kills millions of people. Hitler, everyone. You know, just throw that one out there because you can, right? They were socialist. I think both of those are actually really poor arguments because they're trying to argue with examples of failure and quasi-examples of greatness. When actually we have examples in the United States that we can use right now. And it's a miracle to me that no one's used them yet, so I'm going to give them to you, and maybe you can use them in these arguments because apparently no one's ever thought of this shit, and it's pretty sad. So, socialism, the means of production owned by the state. What do we have that is state-run? The VA is state-run. It is entirely run by the United States government, from payments to payment of the doctors and nurses and the facilities and everything therein. All state-run. How's it doing? Is it the best, most desired healthcare system that we have in the United States, or is it the worst? Can you get better care from a private doctor, a general practitioner, or at the VA? It's state-run, mind you. Do you want all of our healthcare to be state-run? Because what they're truly advocating for is just that. They want all of healthcare to be VA. State-run. All doctors to be state employees. All dentists, all orthodontists, all opticians, all of them, state employees, every last one of them. Do you think that they'd pay these people well? Do you think this would be the pinnacle of healthcare for some reason? When the VA can't even get shit right to begin with, and there's scandal after scandal coming out of that shit. You talk to any veteran, they'll tell you the VA is the worst place to go. You'd better off going to a private doctor, but then you're paying out the ass because the government affairs people don't want to pay private industry. They'd rather you go to the VA so they can keep their money in their pocket. So then we go to Obamacare, the step forward into our great universal health care. And it was an attempt to become the government's insurance broker. They're trying to sell insurance to the government, essentially, at a subsidized rate. How's that going? Is that the best insurance you could possibly get? Or is the one that's through private industry, through a job, or even the ones that you buy yourself, are those better or worse? Now, sure, you may not afford this, or maybe the place you're working at won't pay you, or takes like half your check when you get health insurance or something stupid like that. But when you do have insurance through your job, which is better? State-run insurance or that? How's Medicaid and Medicare in comparison to corporate insurance? Is it good? Is it bad? It's state-run. This is what they want. They want state-run industry. They want state-run means of production. So there's healthcare. How about the next thing they talk about? Free education. Everybody wants free education. Well, we already have quasi-free education. K through 12 is public education for pretty much everyone. How's that going? Does everybody like it? It's the biggest run thing throughout the country. There are some really good schools. Don't get me wrong. I went through public education, although I didn't graduate. But it's not terrible. But it's also incredibly political. There's a lot that's left out. Like this lesson right here for socialism. What the fuck is it? Should have been taught in junior high and high school. It's not. Required reading is not what it used to be either. They have mucked up things with stuff like No Child Left Behind. They try to rubber stamp everybody by a date. Like your age is the most important factor for your mental capabilities, when that is so not true. It's pathetic. There's so much data to say otherwise, but they still try to do it. It's retarded. It's dumb. So how is that K through 12 education going? Because that is free education. There are some dues and fees. Maybe you have to buy your own books and shit like that, because guess what? The funding for state education and federal education, for that matter, the federal funding they get for state education, shows that it's not doing all that well, is it? Now, don't get me wrong, I don't like charter schools, and I don't like the private schools either, because then they can insert stupid nonsense like religion. So private Catholic schools will then teach you that creationism is fucking real and shit like that, and it's damn stupid. But those are examples of where you take something that's socialist and apply it. Now, here's where it gets kind of interesting. You got also the roads, right? The means of production is also the means of delivery to the production. You have the transport and export of goods. Well, roads, water, sewage, all that fun stuff, state run. How's Flint doing? Is Flint, Michigan got the cleanest water in the world or what? It's state run. This is a means of production. Water is produced for people. You don't have to go and collect it from rain. You don't have to drill a well on your land to get water. They run a pipe to your house. Is it healthy? It's state run. This is what you want. It's socialism. Isn't it great? Fucking works everywhere, doesn't it? So here's the problem. So what I've mentioned in these aren't exactly true socialism. And the reason why I say this, and this is probably on the side of the crazy democratic socialists too. They're like, well, socialism's never been tried. That is true. The things that I've listed are social programs. So, for example, Obamacare, the easiest one to point out, that's the closest thing to a socialist thing, to make the government an insurance broker, essentially. Really what they're doing is lowering your costs to have private insurance. So there's a government mandate a law for this to exist so that if you go through their system and register for insurance through their system, you get a actually more expensive rate than if you were to go somewhere else. But essentially, you're supposed to get cheaper insurance because you can't afford much, right? And that seems fair. I mean, just like Medicare and Medicaid was designed for people that don't make much, and it's supposed to help them out, even though that system is equally as abused. These are social programs, and they're not socialist programs. The reason why I say they're not socialist programs is because you still have private industry backing up and supplying and working within these social constructs. The only exception that I can think to this is the VA, where it is completely state and federal funded because it is a branch of the military. It is a part of the Veterans Affairs, and it's a branch of the government. So they're as true a socialist example as you could possibly get within the United States. Because the means of production of healthcare, for example, is state-run for the veterans. And it's shit. But I think that's a better argument for democratic socialism to point out how atrocious it is. But here's another interesting argument that I actually tried out online. I did it on Twitter, and it actually worked pretty well. And that's to say that, well, right now Obama's in charge, or Trump's in charge, right? Trump is our president. We have a Republican Congress, mostly Republican House of Representatives, and you pretty much hate everyone in there. You call them racist, sexist, pigs, homophobes.
The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
You know, just like Hillary just said right there. You know, oh, racist, sexist, xenophobic, homophobic, fucking retardophobic. All of that you say about the current president, you would give him all the power over healthcare, over education, over pretty much anything else, because the means of production would all go to him. You want to give him that much power? What do you think you'd do with it? And then what are you going to do? Mr. Resistance, hashtag wearing dipshit? Are you going to revolt against the government? That's not going to end well. As you've already pointed out, you guys hate guns too. So you'd be unarmed protesters marching on Washington to start a revolt, and then there's 100,000 dead in the streets because you gave the power of everything to the state. They're not answerable to you at that point. You do what the state tells you. You don't get a say. You've just lost that right because your democratic socialism loses its democracy the moment you give power to the powerful. As this old adage saying goes, absolute power corrupts absolutely. What's going to prevent him from putting an executive order in place that grants him more rights over everyone else and allows him to deploy troops on U.S. soil in case of insurrection? Because we're now a socialist utopia. What's going to stop him from doing that? He can do it. The means of production and everything, all goods and services are now controlled through him. So if you don't do what he says, he could squeeze a little. Oh, you over there in California don't like my social policies. Well, how about I just cut your social programs? You now have no education in that state. You're all farmers now. You're all movies that are state-funded movies have to be delivering a message of the state. If we don't like the message you're sending, tough shit. So we have some safeguards in place, thank God, through our Constitution that prevents socialism. Our Constitution is antithetical to everything that socialism stands for. First one is freedom of expression, freedom of speech, right to bear arms, and the Bill of Rights, our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Private ownership is a part of that. The right to bear arms means we get to privately own weaponry in case our government gets a little too cocky. We can put it back in check. We're almost to that point, sadly, because the government seems to think that social politics and identity politics and all that other nonsense is more important than doing their fucking job. For example, we would have immigration reform if Congress would do their goddamn job. But they're not. They'd rather point at Trump and blame all the shit on him because it's election year. So their jobs are at stake. They need to look good, especially to the people they're running with. And anyways, so that's what social or democratic socialism is. It's essentially giving all the power to the state and then mob rule after the fact. Two things that are antithetical to the United States. So anybody voting for social democrats, anybody voting for the Democratic Socialist Party, anybody advocating for democratic socialism is trying to say that, look, you still get to vote while the state runs your job and takes your things and owns everything. But you get a voice, even though you really don't. You're now under the tyranny of the majority. You don't get a voice because you're in rural wherever. You know who does get a voice? The same people that voted for Hillary. The same people that voted for the majority. Every majority vote circumvents yours. You get no voice. You just cut out middle America. You're fucked. And then for my last point, I mentioned the tax rates, 50%. Median income for the United States is about $53,000 to $55,000 a year. So that means for the tax brackets, half from 55,000 is 27,000-ish, some change, depending on how much more or less you make. You just now put well over half of the entire country into poverty because you wanted socialism and took half of the income. Way to fucking go. Sure, you'll tax the rich at a higher rate, but it would have to be not half of theirs, because they wouldn't give a shit at that. You ain't gonna put a dent in their shit. But you just put everybody else that makes the median income at $53,000 in the fucking poorhouse. It wouldn't be 50% of the rich. It would be 50% across the board, because the rich would fucking leave. You treat them unfairly, they ain't gonna stay. What Hollywood types stay in the United States when they saw the taxes go up? They'll leave. Guaranteed they'll leave. They ain't stupid. Anyways, the taxes bit was the easiest thing to debunk. It's like, yeah, sure, they got socialist programs and they take half of everything you own. Everything that you make is gone by half. No, thank you. That's unacceptable. I refuse. Taxation without representation is a thing that we uphold here. And if you think your tax hikes to half is justified, you better be giving me a really good means to justify it, or else I refuse to pay my taxes based on taxation without representation. A legal right that I do have here to I want my taxes represented properly. I don't want half of it gone to places that I don't accept. One of which is the other social programs where we want to open borders and shit like that. That's discussion for a separate segment. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If I get more time, I'm going to do more of these. Hopefully they'll turn out quite well. It's hit and miss because, I got my kids going back to school, so that means I need to go to bed on time. But that means I have to stay up, and then most of the time I'm just too damn tired to do this shit. But yeah, there will be another video coming out this weekend probably regarding this democratic socialist dipshit in New York and everybody praising her and the results thereof, which have a lot to do with Russian bots. Stay tuned.
People flock there from far and wide. It's a thorn in our side. It must be got rid of. I can't afford to let it remain.